What was supposed to be a deliverance ritual turned into a real spiritual battle. The demon mocked our faith, ignored the authority of the word, and manifested with a force that defied everything I knew. The sensation of death was real, and the fight went on until the very last moment. I'm going to tell you a story I never thought would be mine. A story that begins in the deepest darkness and, thank God, found its way to the light. My name is John, and for many years of my life, I was something that many would find hard to believe. A practitioner of high satanic magic. Yes, you heard right. I'm not talking about teenage games or experimenting with the occult out of curiosity. I'm talking about something much darker and more real than most people can imagine. I was born into a family that was broken inside, a family where I never heard "I love you," where I never received a hug from my father. In my home, that small but powerful word didn't exist. Love. What did exist was contempt, especially from my father. You're lazy. You'll never amount to anything in life, hoodlum, lowlife. Those were the words I heard almost daily just because I had long hair and liked metal music. My father said it was devil's music, and without knowing it, those words ended up being a kind of prophecy that I myself would fulfill. Do you know what a lack of love does to a young heart? It leaves such a big emptiness that we try to fill it with anything that makes us feel important, powerful, or simply part of something. And I found that something in the darkest place possible. It didn't come to me like many think. It wasn't that one day I decided to go to a bookstore and buy a black-covered book of spells to play at being a wizard. No, that's for amateurs and charlatans. The real dark circles don't work that way. They seek you out, they study you, they evaluate you according to very specific criteria. Numerology, astrology, spiritual potential. They look for certain traits in people. And for some reason I still don't fully understand, they saw something in me. One day, a man I had never seen before approached me. I can't tell you what he looked like or what car he drove because, even though years have passed, I don't want to have problems. But I can tell you that he knew exactly what to say to attract a wounded boy hungry for acceptance. There is real power, he told me. Not those nonsense things they sell in bookstores, but true, secret, powerful knowledge. And you have been chosen. Chosen? Me? The boy whose own father couldn't even look in the eyes. For the first time in my life, I felt special. And that was the hook I bit without hesitation. Many people confuse Satanism with what they see in movies or books like the Satanic Bible or those fake spell books they sell on any corner. The ones that promise to make you invisible if you recite certain incantations. Pure garbage, I tell you. True black magic, high magic, is something completely different and much more dangerous. You see, in this world there are three forces at work. The force of good, represented by God, which is sovereign and supreme. Then there's human evil, born from our own decisions and weaknesses. And finally, there exists the force of pure evil, personified by the one you know as Satan or the devil. And believe me when I tell you that he is real as you and me. The true satanic circles are like schools for initiates. Not just anyone can enter. There's no address where you can knock on the door and say, "I want to be a Satanist." Like many secret societies, well, more like discreet ones. They invite you. If you compare with other organizations like Freemasonry, nobody just shows up and says, "I want to be a Mason," and gets in just like that. You have to be invited. And that's how my descent began. First, they teach you basic things. They observe how you react, how you assimilate the forbidden knowledge. If you show potential, you keep advancing. If not, they discard you. It's like a constant test. And I, with all that emptiness in my soul, with that rage against my father and against the world, advanced quickly, too quickly. What many people don't understand is that true dark knowledge isn't in public books. The devil isn't foolish enough to put his secrets in bookstores. The real grimoires, the authentic books of power, are carefully guarded, protected, by those who have already proven their loyalty to darkness. I remember the first time I saw one of those books. It wasn't like the famous Dogma and Ritual of High Magic by Eliphas Levi, which anyone can find. It was something much older, with yellowish pages written in a language I didn't even recognize at first. When they allowed me to touch it, I felt a coldness that ran from my fingers to my heart. as if something had awakened in me, something that had always been there, sleeping. People think that those who seek dark power do so because they want to harm others. And sometimes that's true. But in many cases, like mine, what we're looking for is power for ourselves. Sudden fame, money, influence. Those are the baits they use to attract you. Do you want to be respected? Do you want all those who despised you to kneel before you? We can give you that. And so, step by step, they lead you down a path that later becomes almost impossible to leave. They subject you to what I can only describe as a spiritual brainwashing. They make you see the world as they want you to see it, where God is the enemy of human freedom, where morality is a prison invented to control the masses, where true power lies in breaking all divine rules. After months of preparation, my initiation rite arrived. I won't tell you the details because they're things I prefer not to remember, and because I don't want anyone, not even out of curiosity, to feel tempted to seek that path. I'll just tell you that night a part of my humanity died. Or at least, that's what I believed then. What few understand is that these groups have connections with powerful worldwide structures. It's no coincidence that in popular culture we see so many occult symbols in plain sight. The pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, the 13 arrows symbolizing the 13 most powerful families, the owl representing the wisdom of the night. They're all symbols that have very deep meanings for those who know their true sense. You even see how it operates in politics. A true practitioner of the occult rarely seeks the most visible position. They don't want to be president, they want to be vice president or advisor. Why? Because all the artillery, all the attention, and scrutiny are directed at the one in front, while the one behind exercises the real power in the shadows. For years, I lived in that world. I became someone violent, aggressive, always ready to fight. It was as if something dark had settled inside me and controlled my emotions, especially anger. And that violence didn't disappear even when, for reasons I'll tell you about later, I decided to distance myself from those circles. I remember once, when I'd been out of the cult for some time, I went to pick up my mother-in-law to go eat pizza. I stayed waiting in the car while my wife went to let her know. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a man appeared next to my window. It was as if he had emerged from the asphalt itself, like a ninja. He put a revolver to my head and demanded I get out of the car. By pure instinct, I turned off the engine. That made him furious. "Why did you turn off the car? I'm going to kill you!" he shouted at me. I got out calmly, and when I saw he was giving me a little space, I reacted. I shouldn't have done it. It's crazy to confront someone who has a firearm. When someone points a gun at you, you have nothing to gain and everything to lose. If they pull the trigger, your life ends in an instant. But the violence in me was stronger than reason. In a quick movement, I managed to snatch the weapon. It was the first time I used my combat knowledge against a firearm, and it worked. I got the revolver away from him and started shooting at him. Luckily, or perhaps by the grace of God who was already beginning to work in my life without me knowing it, all the bullets missed. It was a .38 revolver, and after the cylinder turned, a couple of times without any shots coming out, I ended up throwing the weapon at the robber's head. The guy fell to the ground, and I was so full of rage that I started hitting him. My wife came running out and begged me to stop. "What are you doing?" she said. "That's enough." I didn't want to stop beating him. A part of me even thought about taking him as a souvenir. That's how sick my heart was back then. But something happened at that moment. Like a flash of light amid so much darkness. I stopped, raised my eyes to the sky, and for the first time in a very long time, I spoke to God. It wasn't an elaborate prayer or anything like that. It was a simple cry. "God, take this violence away from me. Give me a peaceful heart. I don't want to live like this anymore." It was like making a vow right there, with my wife looking at me confused and the robber unconscious at my feet. I knew that if I continued down that path, sooner or later it would end badly. As they say, the tough guy dies sooner, and I no longer wanted to be a tough guy. I wanted to be free from all that darkness that had accompanied me for so many years. What I didn't know then is that that small act, that brief moment of weakness before God, would be the beginning of something much bigger. The start of a path that would lead me from the deepest darkness toward a light I never imagined could exist for someone like me. But before I tell you how my conversion happened, I think it's important for you to understand how deep I was in the world of darkness. I wasn't a simple, curious person. I was completely immersed in practices that make my skin crawl when I remember them. When you enter the circles of high magic, the first thing they do is separate you from your loved ones. Not in a harsh or obvious way, but subtly. They gradually distance you from any positive influence in your life. In my case, it wasn't difficult. My relationship with my family was already broken, and my friends were few and as lost as I was. The next step is to mentally alter you. They force you to perform rituals that seem absurd, but which have the purpose of breaking your will, of making you docile to their teachings. Long hours without sleep, prolonged fasting, constant repetition of certain phrases or mantras. Everything is calculated to weaken your mind until you're like clay in their hands. And then comes the forbidden knowledge. They reveal secrets. To you, they teach you to see the world in a completely different way. There is no longer good or evil, only power and weakness. There is no longer morality, only what works and what doesn't. And they convince you, little by little, that you're on the right side of history, that you're part of an elite that has access to truths that the rest of mortals can't even imagine. I rose quickly in the hierarchy. My inner rage, my desire for power, my desperate need to fill that void left by the lack of love. All of that made me the perfect apprentice. I did what they asked without questioning. I learned with a speed that surprised my mentors, and soon they entrusted me with tasks that normally take years to reach. During that time, I experienced things that defy all rational explanation. I saw objects move without anyone touching them. I heard voices where there was no one else. I felt presences so evil that they froze my blood. And the most frightening thing, I began to enjoy it. The initial fear transformed into a kind of addiction. I wanted more power, more knowledge, more control over those invisible forces. Don't be fooled. The devil gives power. It's real, it's tangible. But what he never tells you is the price you have to pay for it. And the price is your soul, your peace, your ability to love and be loved. You become an empty shell, a puppet of forces that you can't fully control. You think you're the master, but in reality, you're the slave. My awakening began very gradually. It wasn't a dramatic moment of revelation, but small cracks in that building of darkness I had built around myself. Sometimes, in the middle of a ritual, I would wonder, what am I doing? What have I become? But I would immediately stifle those doubts, convinced it was just weakness, the last resistance of my old morality dying. But those doubts became more frequent, more intense. And then something unexpected happened. I met Sarah, the woman who would later become my wife. She wasn't like the other people around me. There was something about her, a light, a natural goodness that disconcerted me. And against all odds, she noticed me. I, who was so accustomed to rejection, to contempt, suddenly found myself being loved by someone who was worth 1,000 times more than me. Sarah knew nothing about my secret life. For her, I was just a boy with problems, with a difficult past, but with a good heart beneath all that hardness. And the most incredible thing is that at times, I myself began to believe in that version of me that she saw. I began to want to be that man who deserved her love. But the darkness doesn't let you go so easily. When I tried to distance myself, when I started missing meetings, rejecting certain practices, that's when the real problems began. Veiled threats, inexplicable accidents, terrible nightmares that woke me up screaming in the middle of the night. And my behavior worsened. The violence that had always been in me intensified, as if something inside me was furious at my attempt to escape. I became more irritable, more prone to explode at the slightest provocation. Sarah endured much more than any person should endure. But she had an unshakable faith. Not in me, but in God. And I believe that's what saved us both. One day, after a particularly bad fight, she looked me in the eyes and said, "There's something in you that isn't yours, something dark that's consuming you. But it's not stronger than God's love, and I'm going to fight for you." Those words hit me like a hammer. How could she see so clearly what I myself didn't want to admit? And how could she continue loving me, despite everything? It was then that I began to seriously consider that perhaps I had made the biggest mistake of my life by surrendering myself to those dark forces. Perhaps everything they had taught me about God as a tyrant, as an enemy of humanity, perhaps all of that was a lie. Because if God could create a love like the one Sarah showed me, then he couldn't be the petty and vengeful God they had described to me. But it wasn't easy. Oh no. Trying to leave Satanism is like trying to escape from a prison where you yourself have forged the chains that bind you. Part of you wants to be free, but another part resists, is afraid, has become accustomed to the darkness. And besides, there's that other presence, that evil force that doesn't want to let you go, that whispers to you in the night that you're a traitor, that you don't deserve forgiveness, that it's too late for you. The incident with the robber that I told you about was a turning point. When I raised my eyes to the sky and asked God to change me, it was as if something inside me broke, a dam that had been containing a river of tears, of repentance for years. And although I didn't know it at that moment, it was my first genuine step toward freedom. Sarah took me to her church. Not one of those luxurious churches with a pastor, in a suit and tie, but a small congregation in a humble neighborhood. Simple, hard-working people, full of that love I had been looking for all my life without knowing it. At first, I went for her, to please her. I would sit in the last pew and listen with skepticism. Part of me still believed it was all a farce, an opium for the people as I had been taught. But something strange was happening. Every time the pastor talked about God's love, about Jesus' sacrifice, something inside me stirred. It wasn't pleasant. It was as if two forces were waging a battle within me. There were moments when I felt a physical rejection, nausea, dizziness. Others when an inexplicable rage invaded me, and I had to contain myself from running out or screaming. It's normal, the pastor told me one day when I told him what was happening to me. What's inside you doesn't want you to hear the truth. It doesn't want you to know there's hope for you. And one Sunday, during a particularly emotional service, it happened. I can't describe exactly what it was. I just know that while everyone was singing around me, I fell to my knees. It was as if an invisible weight was crushing me. And I started to cry. Not normal tears, but a heartbreaking cry that came from the depths of my being. It was as if all the filth, all the darkness I had accumulated over years was leaving me in the form of tears. People gathered around me. They prayed for me. And I felt something I had never experienced. As if a warm and powerful hand was tearing something from my chest, something cold and twisted that resisted coming out. I screamed like I had never screamed before, not from pain, but from liberation. When it was all over, when I could stand up again, I felt different. Light. As if I had been carrying an enormous weight all my life, and suddenly someone had removed it from my shoulders. I looked at Sarah, who was crying beside me, and knew that something fundamental had changed in me. But it wasn't the end of the battle, but barely the beginning. In the days and weeks that followed, I experienced what I can only describe as an authentic spiritual torment. Terrible nightmares, intrusive thoughts of violence and despair, moments when I felt I was going crazy. There were nights when Sarah had to hold me in bed while I screamed and writhed as if something inside me was dying, and something was dying indeed. The evil I had cultivated for so long was giving its final battle, resisting being expelled. What I had voluntarily let in now refused to leave. But this time, I wasn't alone in the fight. I had Sarah. I had the brothers from the church who never abandoned me despite how disturbing the whole process was. And above all, I had discovered that God was real. Not the vengeful and cruel God they had taught me in the satanic circles, but a God of love, of forgiveness, of second chances. One particularly difficult night, when despair threatened to consume me, I remembered a verse I had heard in church. Greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. And I understood that it was true. That no matter how powerful the darkness was, the light was stronger. That no matter how deep I had fallen, God's hand could reach me and pull me out of the pit. It was a long, painful process, with advances and setbacks. I had to face not only my spiritual demons, but also my own traumas, my childhood wounds, my anger toward my father, my feeling of abandonment. I had to learn to forgive, to love, to trust. And above all, I had to learn to forgive myself, which was perhaps the hardest thing of all. But I came out. I came out of the darkness, and when I look back at that young man full of hatred and emptiness that I once was, I barely recognize him. It's as if he were another person, someone I knew a long time ago but who no longer exists. Sarah and I got married. We made a home, had a son whom we named Michael, after the warrior archangel. And for years we lived a life I never thought possible for someone like me. A life of peace, of purpose. I became a living testimony that no one is so lost they can't be found, so broken they can't be mended, so dark they can't be illuminated. But life is never a straight path, is it? A little over 3 weeks ago, my dear Sarah left this world. She had been suffering terribly from an illness, and she always said, "God, take me with you. I want to be in heaven. I want to see Michael." Our son had gone before her, you see, and that had broken something in her heart that never fully healed. One night, she went to sleep peacefully and simply didn't wake up. A massive heart attack, the doctors said. No pain, no suffering. Just as she had always asked God to fall asleep and wake up in heaven. And though I miss her with every fiber of my being, I find comfort in knowing she went in peace, that she's where she always wanted to be. And here I am now, alone, but not abandoned. Sad, but not desperate. Because I know this separation is temporary. I know that someday we will meet again, in a place where there are no tears, no pain, no bitter memories, only light, only love. My story could have been very different. It could have ended in tragedy, in darkness, in perdition. But thanks to the love of a woman who never gave up on me, and thanks to a God who turned out to be interested in a lost Satanist like me, my story became a testimony of hope. And if there's one thing I want you to take from all this, it's precisely that. Hope. No matter how far you think you've gone, how dark your past is, how unforgivable your actions seem to you, there is always a way back to the light. There's always a hand extended, waiting for you to take it. There's always a God who loves you, not despite your wounds and mistakes, but including them as part of the unique person you are. The exorcism I'm talking about wasn't like in the movies. It wasn't a dramatic ritual with a priest sprinkling holy water. It was a long process of healing, of liberation, of transformation. And although the demon didn't want to leave easily, although it fought tooth and nail to maintain its control over me, in the end it had to yield to a greater power. Because that's the truth I discovered after so many years in darkness. That light always overcomes darkness. Not because darkness isn't powerful, but because light is stronger. Much stronger. And that's my story. The story of John, who once walked among demons and now walks toward the light. Not perfect, not completely healed, still struggling day by day with the scars of the past, but free. Finally, free. There are things about the dark world that few people know, and even fewer truly understand. When you're inside, as I was, you see the world through different eyes. You begin to recognize symbols, to understand signs, to perceive connections that go unnoticed by everyone else. It's as if you were given special glasses that allow you to see a parallel reality that has always been there, but that most people cannot or do not want to see. During my time in high magic, I learned things that now make me shudder. It's not just about rituals or enchantments, as many imagine. It's an entire system of knowledge, a way of understanding and manipulating the world that goes back thousands of years. That's why I want to talk to you today about some of these things, not to awaken unhealthy curiosity, but so you understand how deep the darkness was from which God rescued me. When I entered the highest circles, the first thing they taught me was about hierarchies. Just as in heaven there are different ranks of angels, on the dark side there is also a very defined structure. And the same happens on Earth, with the humans who serve these forces. I remember well when they explained to me how power works in this world. No one who truly has power flaunts it, they told me. Those who display power are often just puppets of those who really exercise it from the shadows. It's like in politics. A true servant of darkness will rarely seek to be president or a main figure. They'll prefer to be vice president or advisor. Why? Because all the attention, all the pressure and scrutiny fall on the visible leader, while the one behind can pull the strings without anyone noticing too much. I remember when I came into contact with members of high society, I was surprised to discover how many of them belong to secret societies like Freemasonry. I'm not saying all Masons are bad, mind you. Many enter seeking business connections, or because of family tradition, without having any idea what happens at the highest levels. But Freemasonry has 33 degrees, and only those who reach the 33rd degree truly know all the secrets. It's like a pyramid, where each upper level sees more than the lower one. And at the highest level, well, what is learned there has more connection with the occult than most lower degree Masons would ever imagine. Numerology is another tool, used in these circles. I'm not talking about those simplicities sold in bookstores or found in supermarket magazines. I'm referring to complex systems of numerical interpretation based on the Kabbalah, on ancient Egyptian and Babylonian mathematics. In these systems, each number has a power, a specific vibration. For example, the number 3 has a special meaning in almost all spiritual traditions, both in those of light and those of darkness. It represents many things, the divine trinity for Christians, but also triangular forces for those who practice the occult. 9 is another powerful number. Some consider it a number of completion, of culmination. 3 times 3, the perfection of perfection. But it can also be used to represent the opposite of divine perfection. And then there's the infamous 66666, the number of the beast, as the book of Revelation calls it. Did you know that the Bible mentions that King Solomon received 666 talents of gold each year? That's more than 20 tons of gold. A number associated with excessive material wealth, with earthly power. It's no coincidence that Solomon, after accumulating so much wealth and power, ended up straying from God's path. All this may sound like superstition to the skeptic, but I assure you there is a dark science behind it. A science that studies patterns that are present throughout creation. Have you heard of the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio? It's a mathematical pattern that appears again and again in nature, in seashells, in the arrangement of flower petals, in the spirals of galaxies, even in our own fingerprints. Some call it the divine DNA, the Creator's signature in His work. And it's real. It's mathematically provable. But just as this pattern of life and harmony exists, there are also patterns of chaos and destruction that dark forces try to implement in the world. I remember seeing, in one of the places where we performed certain rituals, a room full of geometric symbols drawn with mathematical precision. They explained to me that each shape, each angle, each proportion had a specific purpose, to channel energies in a certain way. It wasn't simple decoration, it was advanced spiritual technology. It's curious how some of these symbols are in plain sight in our society. The pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, for example. Many think it's just a Masonic symbol, but its origins are much older. It goes back to the Eye of Horus from ancient Egypt, a symbol of protection, but also of power and omniscience. At the base of that pyramid, if you look carefully, you'll see a date engraved in Roman numerals, 1776, the year of American independence, some will say. But it's also the year when a very influential secret society was founded. Nothing is coincidence. In these symbols, there's also the tiny owl hidden on the same bill, which few notice. The owl represents wisdom, but not just any wisdom, nocturnal wisdom, knowledge of the shadows. In many ancient traditions, the owl was a messenger from the world of the dead, of forbidden knowledge. These symbols are everywhere because those who hold real power want to mark their territory, want to remind themselves and their equals who really rules, while common people remain ignorant of these messages that are right before their eyes. Speaking of symbols, something comes to mind that shocked me when I discovered it. Did you know that at the entrance of CERN, the world's largest particle accelerator, there's a statue of Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction? The official explanation is that it represents the cosmic dance of the creation and destruction of particles. But for those of us who know the deeper symbolism, the choice of that precise god, in that precise place, says much more. And this brings me to another topic: the different conceptions of God across cultures. During my time in the occult, I was taught that all religions point to the same truth, that all gods are manifestations of the same force. It's a subtle but powerful lie, designed to relativize faith and make you gradually accept ideas increasingly far from the truth. They told me about Pharaoh Akhenaten, who revolutionized ancient Egypt by trying to establish the worship of a single god, Aton, represented by the solar disk. Some see him as a visionary, a precursor of monotheism. He even built a new city, Akhetaten, dedicated to this cult. What they don't tell you is that it wasn't the true god, but another entity. A light, yes, but not the light. It's like when someone lost in the desert sees a mirage. It looks like water, but it's not. Similarly, there are spiritual lights that seem divine, but are imitations. In those dark years, I came to believe that God was just a concept, an idea created by man to make sense of chaos. They taught me that each person could create their own truth, their own God according to their needs. What a terrible deception. Because God is not a concept or an idea. He is a real personal being who loves us and seeks our salvation. During that time, I became an expert at detecting hidden symbols in movies, music, architecture. I saw subliminal messages everywhere. Some were real, placed there intentionally. Others were products of my mind already programmed to look for patterns where there were none. It's like when you look at clouds and see shapes. A bear, a face, a dragon. Your brain is designed to connect dots and create meaningful patterns. And when you've been trained in the occult, you start seeing those patterns everywhere, sometimes even where they don't exist. For example, those absurd theories about satanic messages if you play songs backwards, or accusations that certain children's movies hide sexual symbols. Most are nonsense, products of minds obsessed with finding evil in every corner. But, and this is an important but, that doesn't mean there aren't real dark influences in our culture. There are, and they're powerful. Only they're not where most conspiracy hunters think they find them. They're more subtle, more sophisticated, and they aim at something much more valuable than shocking. They seek to normalize certain ideas, certain behaviors that slowly distance us from God and from His design for our lives. Let me tell you something personal. When I was deepest in my dark path, I wrote a book. I did it as part of my mission to plant certain ideas in the minds of those who would read it. It wasn't an openly satanic book. It was more subtle than that. It mixed truths with lies, as the enemy always does. In that book, I described a certain type of person who would eventually come to political power. I didn't give names, but I hinted at certain characteristics: foreign origin, specific ambitions, a certain appearance. To my surprise, years later, when that book was already published and I had already emerged from darkness, a politician appeared who seemed to fit that description perfectly. People started making connections, saying I had prophesied his arrival. The most ironic thing is that this same politician mentioned my book at a rally, without really knowing what it was about. This made my book sell like hotcakes. It was strange to see how something I had written with such dark intentions ended up, in some twisted way, providing for my sustenance when I was already on a different path. I don't think that politician was really who people thought he was. It was probably just a coincidence, or perhaps something more. What I do know is that the forces of darkness are real and constantly work to infiltrate all spheres of power, be it politics, entertainment, education, or religion. But after everything I've seen and experienced, I also know with certainty that these forces, powerful as they may be, are nothing compared to the power of God. As Scripture says, "Greater is He who is in you than he who is in the world." This is a truth I verified in my own life, in my own flesh. When I was in the occult, I felt powerful. I believed I had access to knowledge and abilities that ordinary people couldn't even imagine. But now I understand that what I had wasn't true power, but chains disguised as power. It was like a prisoner who thinks he's free because they give him the key to his own cell, without realizing he's still locked in a larger prison. True power, true freedom, I found when I surrendered to God. When I stopped fighting, trying to control everything, seeking in darkness what is only found in light. It was as if my whole life I had been trying to light a candle in a deep cave, when all I needed to do was walk out into the sunlight. There's one more thing I want to talk to you about. Something I learned in those dark years that I think is important to share. It's about how these forces operate in our current society. It's not like in the movies, with elaborate rituals and bloody sacrifices, although those things also exist in certain circles. It's much more subtle, more insidious. They work primarily through cultural influence, gradually changing our values, normalizing behaviors we once considered unacceptable, ridiculing sincere faith while elevating certain alternative spiritual practices. They also operate through fear, division, hatred. When you see people who should love each other attacking with fury, when you see families destroyed by grudges that could be resolved with a simple conversation, when you see entire nations consumed by hatred towards others, those are the true works of darkness. The prince of this world is an expert at setting us against each other. Divide and conquer, that's been his strategy since the beginning of time. And we, poor fools, fall for it again and again. Even believers allow ourselves to be dragged into battles that aren't ours, forgetting that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. During my years in the occult, I learned specific techniques for sowing discord, for identifying points of tension in relationships and exacerbating them to the breaking point. It was like a dark art, a form of spiritual and psychological manipulation, and the worst part is that it worked. I saw relationships of years destroyed in weeks under the influence of these techniques. Now, from the other side, I can recognize these same tactics operating on a large scale in our society. And my heart breaks, because I know the damage I know the suffering they generate. And I know there are people like I used to be, actively working to implement them, believing they serve some higher purpose when in reality they're only spreading misery and despair. But I also know there is hope. If God could rescue me, who was so deeply immersed in darkness, He can rescue anyone. If He could transform my heart full of hatred and violence into one capable of loving and forgiving, He can do the same with the most hardened heart. And I know that in the end, when all is said and done, light will prevail over darkness. Not because we are so strong or so good, but because He is faithful and His love is more powerful than all the hatred and all the evil this world can generate. When I look back at those years lost in darkness, I can't help but feel a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the wasted time, for the harm caused, but also deep gratitude because now I can use that same experience to help others, to warn them about the dangers I didn't know to avoid. It's as if God, in His infinite wisdom and mercy, took even our worst mistakes and transformed them into tools for His glory. As the psalm says, I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten. And boy, has He done that in my life. Recently, after giving my testimony in a church, a young man approached me. He had the same look I had at his age. Long hair, dark clothes, that half-defiant, half-lost look I knew so well. He told me he was experimenting with the Ouija board, with certain rituals he had found on the internet, that he was fascinated by the occult and wanted power. I told him my story, without embellishing anything, without hiding the ugly and painful parts. I told him about the emptiness that never fills, the promises that are never kept, the price you pay without even realizing it until it's too late. And I saw something in his eyes that I recognized, the beginning of doubt, the first crack in the wall. I don't know if that young man changed course. That's between him and God. But I planted a seed. And that's what we can all do. Plant seeds of truth and light in a world that desperately needs them. And that's what I try to do every day since God gave me this second chance. Use my voice, my story, my pain and my healing to show others that there is a way out, that there is hope even in the darkest night. Because if there's one thing I've learned in this bumpy life of mine, it's that no matter how far you've gone in the wrong direction, it's never too late to turn around and start walking toward the light. It's never too late to allow God to perform His own exorcism in your life, driving out the darkness and filling you with His light, with His love, with His peace that surpasses all understanding. And although sometimes the demon doesn't want to leave, although it clings with tooth and nail to what it considers its own, it's no match for the power of God. In the end, it always has to yield. It always has to flee before the presence of the King of Kings. That's the truth that sustains my life today. That's the hope that keeps me going each day, even after having lost so much. The road is long, the battle is hard, but the victory is already assured. And meanwhile, here I am. A simple man with an extraordinary story of mercy and redemption. A living testimony that there is no darkness so deep that the light of God cannot penetrate and transform. When you come out of darkness and embrace the light, you don't just change sides, you also acquire a unique perspective. It's as if you had lived for years as a spy in enemy territory and suddenly returned home with all the plans, all the strategies, all the secrets. That's why I can recognize the enemy's tactics so clearly now. I know how he thinks, how he works, how he recruits. I know the lures he uses, the lies he tells, the doors he seeks to open in our lives. Not because I'm especially smart or spiritual, but because I spent years on the other side of the battlefield. And if there's one thing I want you all to understand, it's that the battle is real. It's not a metaphor, not a symbol, not a psychological construct. There really is a war raging for the souls of men and women. A war that began before time and will continue until the end. But, and this is the good news, it's a war whose outcome is already decided. The enemy fights desperately because he knows his time is short. He knows he's already defeated, even though he refuses to admit it. So we can face each day not with fear, but with confidence. Not with despair, but with hope. Not with hatred, but with love. Because we know who holds tomorrow. We know who has already won the final victory. I don't know what battles each of you are fighting right now. I don't know what darkness might be trying to claim your life, your family, your mind, your heart. But I do know that no darkness, no matter how deep, can withstand the light of God when we invite him in. I know because I've lived it. Because I was as lost as anyone could be, as far from God as anyone could stray. And yet here I am, redeemed, restored, renewed, not by my own strength or merit, but by his amazing grace. So if you're in that dark place now, if you feel surrounded by shadows with no way out, I want you to know that there is hope. There is a path. There is a hand reaching out to you, ready to lead you back to the light. All you have to do is reach back. All you have to do is say yes. Not perfectly, not completely, just a simple, honest yes. That's how my journey back began, with a desperate cry in a parking lot after nearly beating a man to death. Not very glamorous, not very spiritual, just a broken man finally admitting he needed help. And that's enough. That's all God needs. Just an opening, just a crack in the wall we've built around our hearts. He'll do the rest. He'll finish what he starts. That's who he is. That's what he does. So I'll end where I began, with my story. A story that started in the deepest darkness and found its way to the light. A story that proves no one is beyond redemption. No one is too far gone. No one is so lost they can't be found. A story that isn't about me at all, really. It's about him. About a love so powerful it breaks every chain, heals every wound, restores every broken piece. A love that turned a Satanist into a son, a slave into an heir, an enemy into a friend. That's the power of God. That's the miracle of grace, and that's the hope I offer you today. And that's precisely what I want to share with you today. The secrets of the organization I left, so you can understand what we're really up against. Many ask me, is that famous number 666 real? Does it have any real meaning? Or is it just an exaggeration from horror movies? I can assure you it's very real, and it has a much older foundation than most imagine. In the Book of Kings, chapter 10, verse 14, the Bible tells us that King Solomon received 666 talents of gold each year. It's not a coincidence. This same number later appears in Revelation 13:18 as the number of the beast. This parallel isn't accidental. Gold, material wealth, earthly power, all these things, when they become idols, can be gateways to spiritual corruption. Solomon, with all his wisdom, ended up straying from the path precisely because of these temptations. In the highest circles of Satanism, they taught us that 666 represents an inverted trinity. Just as there exists the divine trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, there exists a satanic trinity composed of the devil, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. Three entities working in perfect harmony for a common purpose: to deceive, destroy, and condemn. The devil is the architect, the Antichrist is his human representative on earth, and the false prophet is who gives him spiritual credibility, who presents him to the world as the solution to all our problems. A perfect trio for the greatest deception in history. According to the interpretations of Revelation 17 that they taught me, the false prophet would come from the Vatican. He would be the 8th pope after the Vatican was constituted as a sovereign state, which occurred on February 11, 1929, with the signing of the Lateran treaties. If we count from that moment, excluding Pius V, who was already in office when the treaties were signed, and following with all the popes who have come after, we reach the conclusion that the current one is the 7th. According to this interpretation, the next would be the 8th, the last one, the one who would give his support to the Antichrist. I'm not saying this will happen with certainty. I'm telling you what I was taught, what I believed when I was on the other side. Now my trust is in God and His Word, not in human interpretations of prophecies that can be manipulated. But I am struck by a curious detail. When the third to last pope resigned, he did so precisely on the same day as the anniversary of the signing of the Lateran treaties. And that same day, lightning struck the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. Coincidences, perhaps, or perhaps not. In my experience, there are few coincidences in the spiritual realm. Beyond prophecies and numbers, what I want you to understand is the organizational structure of the kingdom of darkness. It's not disorganized chaos as many think. It's a hierarchical system, meticulously organized, with clear chains of command and defined purposes. At the top is Satan himself, the prince of this world, as the Bible calls him. Below him are four great princes who rule over different aspects of humanity: Beelzebub, Astaroth, Asmodeus, and Leviathan. Each has his sphere of influence, his specialty, in terms of temptations and deceptions. Beelzebub, for example, is known as the Lord of the Flies, associated with corruption, disease, and impurity. Astaroth is linked to forbidden knowledge, to intellectual pride. Asmodeus is the demon of lust, of sexual perversions. And Leviathan is a territorial spirit associated with waters, with pride and rebellion. According to what they taught me, Leviathan is the territorial spirit that acts over our country. He's linked to waters, and it's no coincidence that many of the entities venerated in certain syncretic cults are also associated with rivers, seas, and lakes. It's the same spiritual force presenting itself with different masks according to the culture. Below these princes is a whole hierarchy of spirits, each with its specific function. Some work in the political realm, others in the cultural, others in the religious. It's like a perfectly coordinated army, where each soldier knows exactly what his mission is, and the main mission is always the same: deceive, divide, destroy, create confusion where there should be clarity, sow hatred where there should be love, promote death where life should flourish. But the most terrifying thing is how this spiritual structure has its reflection in the material world, through people who consciously or unconsciously serve these powers. From the high political and economic spheres to the darkest corners of the internet, the system is designed to perpetuate darkness. One aspect that impressed me when I was inside was the level of intelligence and coordination they have. It's almost like an international espionage agency. They can track someone, know their movements, their weaknesses, their vulnerable points. Everything is interconnected in this digital age, and they know how to use that interconnection for their purposes. It's not paranoia, it's the reality I experienced. When you receive an invitation to join these circles, they've already thoroughly investigated you. They know who you are, where you come from, what motivates you, what your emotional wounds are. They study you like a predator studies its prey before attacking. And you know what's most disturbing? That in our modern era, this type of surveillance and data collection is no longer exclusive to secret groups or government agencies. It's within reach of anyone with the right technical knowledge. Our phones, our connected devices, our social networks. Everything is constantly collecting information about us, information that can be used to manipulate us. I'm not saying we should live in fear or become paranoid. I'm saying we should be aware of the spiritual and material realities that surround us, so we can properly protect ourselves. Because when I decided to leave that world, when I chose the light, I experienced firsthand what it means to face these forces. I told you about my conversion process, about how God rescued me from darkness, but I haven't told you what came after. At first, I thought it would all be peace and blessings, that once out of Satanism, my life would be a bed of roses. How wrong I was. The most difficult part was just beginning. The first thing I did was tell Sarah, my wife, everything. To my surprise, she didn't run away. She hugged me, cried with me, and said, "God brought you into my life for a reason, and together we're going to overcome this." Then we decided I should share my testimony. I wrote a book telling my experience, without mentioning specific names, but describing how these groups function, how they recruit, how they manipulate. It was my way of warning others, of preventing them from falling into the same traps I did. And that's when the problem started. As soon as the book was published, the threats began. First subtle, then increasingly explicit. My pets appeared, dead one morning. Anonymous messages, calls in the middle of the night, people following me on the street. "You'll be next," I constantly thought. Fear settled in my home like an unwanted guest. Sarah and I slept in shifts, one watching while the other rested. We lived in a constant state of alert, of terror. But the most painful thing was the rejection from those we expected would support us. Many people from the church distanced themselves from us. They were afraid that the darkness I had brought with me would somehow contaminate them too. I don't blame them. Fear of the unknown can be very powerful. I especially remember one pastor. His church was large, influential. He had political ambitions, had even been a candidate for the presidency with a message of national restoration. He invited me to his congregation, but when he learned of my past, he told me something I'll never forget. "Don't say you belong to this church. Don't mention my name in your testimonies. If people find out there's an ex-Satanist here, that will ruin my image, my projects." I felt like a leper in biblical times, shouting, "Unclean, unclean," so no one would come near me. I, who had hoped to find acceptance and brotherhood in God's house, found closed doors and suspicious looks. But God is faithful. There's something in his eyes that isn't human. When I met Robert, as I'll call him to protect his identity, I immediately understood what my friend was referring to. At first glance, he seemed like a normal young man, perhaps a bit withdrawn. But when he started talking, there was something in his voice, in his gaze, that was deeply disturbing. He had been arrested several times for violent assaults. On one occasion, he nearly beat a man to death in an argument over a trivial matter. The most disturbing thing was the coldness with which he spoke of these episodes, as if he were describing the weather or what he had eaten for breakfast. That day, I spent hours talking with Robert. I asked him about his childhood, his family, his beliefs. Little by little, a tragic picture emerged. A childhood marked by severe abuse. A father who beat him regularly. A mother who, though loving, was too weak to protect him. And at the age of 13, an encounter with something that would change his life forever. "I found a book," he told me, his voice changing subtly as he spoke. "A book about summoning spirits. I thought it was just a game. I performed the ritual it described because I wanted something. Anything to protect me from my father." He paused, his eyes fixed on a point beyond me, as if seeing something I couldn't. "Something answered," he whispered. "And it's been with me ever since." What followed was one of the most intense spiritual battles I've ever witnessed. Not a Hollywood-style exorcism with dramatic effects, but a long, exhausting process. Weeks of prayer, counseling, confronting both the psychological and spiritual aspects of his condition. There were moments when Robert seemed to improve, when the light returned to his eyes and he spoke of hope, of a future. And there were others when he fell back into darkness, when that other voice, that other presence, seemed to take control. In the end, with the help of God and a team of believers committed to his healing, Robert was freed. The darkness that had accompanied him for so many years finally left, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a gradual process, like a heavy fog lifting slowly until the sun can be seen clearly. Today, Robert is a different person. The violent outbursts have ceased. The cold look in his eyes has been replaced by a genuine warmth. He's rebuilding his life, studying, working, even helping others who are going through similar situations. His case taught me something crucial. True deliverance is never just spiritual or just psychological. It's holistic. It addresses the wounds of the soul, the lies we've believed, the traumas we've experienced, as well as the spiritual forces that may have taken advantage of those wounds. And above all, it taught me that no one, absolutely no one, is beyond God's reach. If he could rescue Robert from that darkness, if he could rescue me from my own personal hell, he can rescue anyone. Truly, no case is too difficult for him. So, if you're struggling today, if you feel that darkness is closing in around you, remember, you're not alone. The same God who has freed so many others is waiting for you to call on him. And when you do, you'll discover that he's closer than you ever imagined, more powerful than your darkest fears, more loving than your deepest hopes. Because in the end, that's what it's all about. Not rituals, not formulas, not religious systems, but a personal encounter with the living God who gives light to the darkest night and brings hope to the most desperate heart. That's the true exorcism. That's the real deliverance. And it's available to each one of you right now. When I get angry, Robert explained to me with terrifying calmness, it's like someone else takes control. I see everything from a distance, as if I were watching a movie where I'm the main actor. Many would say Robert was simply a psychopath, someone with antisocial personality disorder. And certainly, there were elements of that in his behavior. But after spending time with him, praying with him, truly listening to his story, I began to see something more. Robert had grown up in a home where violence was everyday life. His father, a brutal man, constantly beat him while invoking the demons of power to enter his son and make him a real man. It was a macabre ritual that was repeated almost daily. And here's the important thing. Words have power. When we pronounce certain things, especially over small children whose spirits are so moldable, we're opening doors that perhaps we don't know how to close afterward. Robert's father, without knowing it, had performed a kind of dark initiation on his own son. Working with Robert was one of the most difficult processes I've faced. It wasn't simply about casting out a demon, like in those television shows where the possessed person falls to the ground writhing and then gets up cured. It was a long, painful process of holistic healing. Robert needed spiritual liberation, yes, but he also needed emotional healing for the deep wounds his father had inflicted. He needed mental renewal to unlearn destructive thought patterns, and he needed social restoration to learn how to relate to others in a healthy way. After months of work, constant prayer, and counseling, Robert began to change. The darkness in his eyes started to dissipate. His voice lost that disturbing tone. He began to feel emotions he had blocked for years. Sadness for what he had done, empathy toward those he had hurt, hope for a different future. I tell you this because it illustrates something crucial. In many cases, the psychological and the spiritual are so intertwined that it's impossible to treat them separately. A human being is an integrated whole, body, soul, and spirit. A wound in one area inevitably affects the others. This integrated understanding has allowed me to avoid two equally dangerous extremes. On one hand, the extreme of seeing demons everywhere, attributing to spiritual forces problems that have natural causes. On the other hand, the extreme of completely denying the spiritual dimension, reducing all human experience to chemical and psychological processes. The truth, as often happens, is somewhere in between, and finding that point of balance is fundamental to truly helping those who suffer. This brings me to another case that deeply impacted me. A family contacted me because their teenage son, Michael, had disappeared for 3 days. When he finally returned, he was completely changed. He spoke in codes, drew strange symbols on the walls of his room, and said he was receiving messages from higher entities. The parents were terrified, thinking their son had been possessed by some evil spirit during his mysterious absence. But when I sat down to talk with Michael, I discovered something very different. The boy had been experimenting with psychedelic substances during a camping trip with friends. The experience had been so intense that it had triggered a psychotic episode. The symbols he drew weren't magical or demonic. They were simply visual patterns typical of hallucinations caused by those substances. And the codes he spoke in turned. out to be from an old Boy Scouts manual, something he had read in his childhood that had now, in his altered state, resurfaced in his mind. Michael didn't need an exorcism, he needed urgent psychiatric attention, and thank God, he received it. With proper medication and therapy, Michael was able to completely recover from his psychotic episode. This experience taught me the importance of not rushing into spiritual diagnoses. Sometimes, what seems supernatural has very natural explanations. And in those cases, the most loving, most Christian thing we can do is direct the person toward the medical or psychological help they need. But I've also seen the opposite extreme. Cases that modern medicine cannot explain or resolve. Behaviors that defy all human logic. Manifestations that can only be described as supernatural. I met a woman, Lucy, who suffered from what doctors had diagnosed as severe epilepsy. She took a dozen different medications, had gone through multiple surgeries, and still the seizures continued. But there was something strange about these episodes. They occurred specifically when she was in churches or when someone tried to pray for her. During one of her attacks, I had the clear impression that I should speak not to her, but to what was inside her. And when I did, when I addressed directly the spiritual entity that was tormenting her, her voice changed completely. A deep, almost masculine voice came from her throat, saying things that Lucy, a simple woman with little education, couldn't have known. This voice mentioned specific details of my satanic past that I had never shared publicly. It knew names, dates, rituals. It was the voice of something ancient, something that had been watching from the shadows for a long time. That's the crucial difference. A psychological disorder, no matter how severe, is limited to the knowledge and experience of the person suffering from it. It can be disturbing, it can be challenging, but it doesn't contain information that the person couldn't know through natural means. In contrast, a true demonic manifestation often reveals knowledge that transcends what that person could know. It speaks languages the person has never studied. It reveals secrets they couldn't know. It demonstrates physical abilities that defy the normal capabilities of the human body. Lucy's case was one of authentic liberation. After hours of intense prayer, of spiritual confrontation, of invoking Christ's authority over that entity, Lucy was set free. And most amazing, her epileptic seizures completely disappeared. The doctors couldn't explain it, but we could. These experiences have taught me to be extremely careful in discerning the nature of the problems people face. Not all strange or disturbing behavior has spiritual causes. When it seemed that everything was against us, he put in our path a small congregation, a group of humble believers who were neither impressed by my past nor frightened by the threats. They welcomed us, protected us, prayed for us. They became the family we never had. And little by little, the threats diminished. Not because the dark forces had surrendered, but because the light that now surrounded us was stronger than any darkness. Sarah and I began to travel, sharing our testimony in different places. Not to seek fame or recognition, but to show others that no matter how deep the darkness you find yourself in, there's always a way back to the light. And as I shared my story, I met people who had gone through similar experiences. Ex-cultists, ex-practitioners of witchcraft, even other ex-Satanists, all with the same story. They had sought power, forbidden knowledge, answers to their deepest questions, and all had ended up trapped in a system that promised freedom, but delivered slavery. One of the questions I'm asked most often when I share my testimony is about demonic possession. Is it real? How does it work? Can anyone be possessed? I answer from my experience and from what I now understand in light of the Bible. Yes, demonic possession is real, but it's not as frequent or as spectacular as horror movies would have us believe. It's not about heads spinning 360 degrees or people levitating. It's much more subtle and, for that very reason, much more dangerous. Possession or demonic influence occurs when a person, voluntarily or involuntarily, opens spiritual doors that should remain closed. It can be through occult practices, through the consumption of certain substances that alter consciousness, or even through severe emotional traumas that create cracks in our natural spiritual protection. The demons that can possess or directly influence human beings are usually of lower rank in the hierarchy. The princes, those of greater power, rarely get directly involved. It's like in an army. The generals aren't on the front lines. They send the foot soldiers. And here I want to make an important clarification. Not all mental or emotional problems have a demonic cause. Depression, anxiety, personality disorders. These are real medical conditions that require professional treatment. Attributing everything to demons is not only incorrect, but can be dangerous, preventing people from seeking the help they really need. When I see certain deliverance ministers who see demons around every corner, who put on shows where supposed evil spirits speak through people, giving testimonies or asking for tithes, it deeply saddens me. That's not true deliverance. It's religious theater that trivializes a very serious spiritual reality. A true demon, a spirit that has existed for millennia, wouldn't speak like in those deliverances. It wouldn't make grammatical errors, wouldn't make jokes, wouldn't behave like a cartoon character. They are ancient, cunning entities that perfectly understand how the human soul works because they've been observing us from the beginning. And this brings me to another common question. If demonic possessions exist, do angelic possessions also exist? Can angels incorporate into people as demons supposedly do? The answer is no. Angels don't seek to control human beings or use their bodies. Their mission is to protect, guide, help, always respecting our free will. An angel can influence, inspire, even communicate in various ways, but will never take control of a person as an evil spirit would. This is fundamental to understanding the difference between the kingdom of light and that of darkness. One respects your freedom. The other seeks to steal it. One elevates you, the other degrades you. One brings you closer to your true identity. The other takes you away from it. During my years in dark practices, I witnessed many channeling rituals where supposedly superior entities manifested through mediums. It seemed impressive, even revealing. But now I understand it was just another form of deception. The entities that communicated weren't sources of elevated wisdom. They were spirits of deception disguised as light. As Scripture says, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. This is perhaps one of his most effective deceptions, presenting himself not as the embodiment of evil, but as an enlightened guide, a spiritual master, a source of superior knowledge. And many people fall for this deception because they're genuinely seeking answers, seeking a connection with the divine, seeking a higher purpose for their lives. Spiritual hunger is real and legitimate. The problem is where we seek to satisfy it. Another question I'm frequently asked refers to the powerful of this world. Is it true that many political leaders, magnates, celebrities are involved in the occult? Do those secret rituals that are so talked about on the internet really exist? Again, I must be cautious. I can't give names or specifically accuse anyone. But I can say that, based on my experience, there is a natural attraction between power and the occult. Those who have excessive ambitions, who are willing to do anything to reach the top, tend to be more susceptible to promises of secret knowledge and supernatural power. I've seen people of great influence participate in rituals that the common citizen would find disturbing. I'm not talking about human sacrifices or things like that, although history documents that these practices have existed in various cultures. I'm referring to ceremonies designed to channel certain types of energy, to establish spiritual pacts, to ensure protection and success. These rituals are usually very different from the caricatures we see in movies. They're not hooded men around pentagrams drawn with blood. They're much more sophisticated events, often disguised as exclusive meetings, spiritual retreats, or traditional ceremonies. What concerns me most isn't these specific individuals and their practices, but the impact they have on society in general. Because when someone in a position of power serves darkness, consciously or unconsciously, their decisions affect thousands or millions of people. The policies they implement, the values they promote, the structures they create or reinforce, all of it can facilitate or hinder the advance of God's kingdom on earth. It's not a matter of political parties or human ideologies. It's a spiritual battle being fought in the material field. But I don't want to sow fear or paranoia, because even in the face of these realities, there is a more powerful truth. If God is for us, who can be against us? No human or demonic conspiracy can prevail against God's eternal purposes. And those purposes include redemption, restoration, reconciliation of all things. They include people like me, snatched from the clutches of darkness and brought into marvelous light. They include transformation of hearts, renewal of minds, healing of deep wounds. My story is living proof that there is no one so lost they cannot be found, no one so broken they cannot be restored, no one so stained they cannot be cleansed. If God could rescue me, who was in the depths of darkness, He can rescue anyone. And that's the hope I want to leave you with today. No matter how dark the world seems, no matter how powerful the forces of evil appear, light is always stronger. Always. Evil may have its moments of apparent victory. It can cause us pain, suffering, confusion. It can make us doubt, fear, even despair. But it will never have the last word. The last word belongs to the one who said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." And that promise remains as valid today as when it was spoken 2,000 years ago. So don't be afraid. Don't be intimidated by darkness, nor by those who serve darkness. Don't think you're unprotected or abandoned. The same God who rescued me is also with you, ready to fight your battles, to heal you, to restore you, to use you as instruments of His light in a world that desperately needs it. My exorcism didn't go wrong. It was long, painful, full of battles I thought I couldn't win. The demon didn't want to leave, it's true. It held on with all its might, used all its tricks, mobilized all its resources. But in the end, it had to yield to a greater power. And that same power is available to each of you. Not as a magical force to manipulate or control, but as the living presence of a God who loves, who heals, who liberates, who transforms. That's my story. That's my testimony. From darkness to light, from slavery to freedom, from death to life. And it can also be the story of anyone who is willing to take the step from fear to faith, from despair to hope, from loneliness to communion with the living God. Because in the end, no matter how dark the night is, dawn always, always comes. As my path in faith progressed, God began to use me in ways I never would have imagined. My testimony attracted people who were struggling with their own demons, both literally and figuratively. And I began to see cases that forced me to ask myself, where does the human end and where does the demonic begin? This is perhaps one of the most difficult questions to answer in the spiritual realm. As someone who was on the other side, who knew darkness from within, I learned to distinguish between problems that have purely psychological roots and those that have a spiritual dimension. But the line that separates them is much thinner than most imagine. I remember one case in particular that deeply impacted me. One day I received a call from a pastor friend. He was desperate because he had in his church a young man with extremely violent behaviors. "I've seen many things in my ministry," he told me, "but this is different. And not everything that seems to have a medical or psychological explanation is free from spiritual influence. This ability to discern is perhaps one of the most important ways God has used my dark past for good. Because having been on the other side, having known the enemy's strategies and tactics from the inside, I can recognize his influence where others might not see it. But I've also learned to be humble, to not rely only on my experience or knowledge, but to constantly seek God's wisdom, because only He sees the complete picture. Only He truly knows the depths of the human heart and the realities of the spiritual world. And this brings me to a topic many ask me about. Can a person make a pact with the devil to obtain supernatural power? Are those stories of serial killers who claim to have obtained their strength and abilities through dark rituals real? I've heard stories of violent criminals who claim to have made blood pacts to obtain protection or power. Stories of men who say they can face entire groups of attackers because something gives them superhuman strength in those moments. From my experience, I can tell you these pacts are real, but they don't work as most people think. The enemy doesn't give away power in exchange for nothing. If he gives, it's to take much more in return. It's like signing a contract without reading the fine print, where immediate benefits hide a devastating spiritual cost in the long term. When someone thinks they're using dark power for their own ends, they're actually being used by that power. What seems to be control is in reality the deepest form of slavery. During my time in the occult, I met people who had made these pacts, men who seemed untouchable, who survived situations where anyone would have died, who had an aura of intimidation that kept away even the bravest. But I also saw the price they paid. The constant nightmares. The inability to feel normal emotions, like love or joy. The deep fear they experienced when they were alone in the dark, knowing that someday they would have to pay their debt in full. One of these men, whom I'll call Charles, had been a hired killer for a criminal organization. He told me that before each job, he performed a specific ritual where he offered his victim's life to a certain entity in exchange for accuracy, invisibility, and safe escape. I never missed a shot, he told me with a mixture of pride and horror in his voice. I was never caught. It was as if I became invisible, as if bullets dodged me instead of me dodging them. But Charles couldn't sleep without drinking himself into unconsciousness, because when he was sober and closed his eyes, he saw the faces of all those he had killed. And behind those faces, lurking like a patient predator, was the entity with which he had made his pact, waiting for the day it would come to collect its debt. When I met Charles, he was dying of liver cirrhosis, the result of decades of alcoholism. But his greatest fear wasn't physical death, but what would come afterward. I know they're waiting for me on the other side, he told me, trembling. I know there's no escape. I spent Charles's last days praying with him, reading him scripture, assuring him that even for someone like him, there was hope in Christ's cross. In his final moments, he grabbed my hand with surprising strength for a man so physically weak and whispered, I believe he has forgiven me. I can feel it. The darkness can't touch me anymore. And I saw in his eyes, for the first time since I'd known him, peace. True peace. He died that night, holding a small wooden cross I had given him, with a serene expression that contradicted all the dark predictions about his end. Charles's story taught me that no matter how deep the pact someone has made with darkness, the redemptive power of Christ is stronger. There is no spiritual bond so powerful that his blood cannot break it. No spiritual debt so great that his sacrifice cannot pay. This brings me to another important aspect of my ministry, helping people who have been involved in seemingly harmless occult practices. Things like tarot reading, Ouija sessions, astrological consultations, or participation in certain rituals that appear more cultural tradition than spiritual practice. Many people get involved in these activities without really understanding their nature or implications. They see them as games, as entertainment, as cultural curiosities. They don't realize they're opening spiritual doors that they may later have difficulty closing. I remember a young couple who consulted me because they were experiencing strange phenomena in their home. Objects moving by themselves, unexplained noises during the night, recurring nightmares with the same terrifying elements. Everything had begun after, out of curiosity, they had bought a Ouija board from a novelty store and spent a night playing with friends. We didn't really believe in it, they told me. It was just for fun, to scare ourselves a little, like on Halloween. I explained to them that these tools aren't simple toys. They are contact points, doors that open to spiritual realities that exist regardless of whether we believe in them or not. It's like a child playing with radioactive materials, without understanding what they are. Their ignorance doesn't protect them from the harmful effects. After several prayer sessions, specific renunciations of the ties they had created that night, and a spiritual cleansing of their home, the phenomena ceased. The couple was amazed by the difference. It's as if the air itself is different, the wife told me, as if a dark cloud we didn't know was there had lifted. My own journey has taught me this fundamental truth, that there is no neutrality in the spiritual realm. Each thought, each action, each creation brings us closer to either light or darkness. It's not always obvious in the moment, and sometimes the paths seem to blur, but eventually, each path clearly reveals its destination. And that's why I continue, sharing my story, my testimony. Not to frighten, not to create spiritual paranoia, but to illuminate, to show that there are options, that there is discernment, that there is true freedom available to all. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my journey from the depths of Satanism to the light of God's love, it's this. Darkness is real, but light is stronger. Deception is deep, but truth prevails. Spiritual slavery is terrible, but freedom in Christ is more powerful than any chain the enemy can forge. And this is the hope I want to leave you with today. No matter how dark the panorama seems, no matter how complex the spiritual battle we face, the victory is already assured. The cross has already triumphed. The tomb is already empty. The King already reigns. And though the demon doesn't want to leave, though it clings with tooth and nail to what it considers its own, the last word doesn't belong to it. It belongs to the one who said, "Behold, I make all things new." That's the promise that sustains me. That's the truth that frees me. And that's the hope I offer to all who, like I once was, are trapped in darkness that seems impenetrable. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. It never will. There are moments in life that mark a before and after. Experiences that shake you to your foundations and force you to rethink everything you thought you knew. For me, that moment came with an exorcism that almost ended in tragedy. An exorcism where the demon refused to leave, where I faced evil in its purest form, and where I learned lessons that would forever change my ministry and my life. But before I tell you that story, let me share something important. In my years of ministry, I've learned that there are tools and symbols God has given us to combat the forces of darkness. One of them is the anointing oil, prepared according to ancient biblical recipes, like the one found in Exodus for anointing the tabernacle and its utensils. This isn't a magical element, as many believe. It has no power in itself. The power comes from God, and the oil is simply a symbol, a point of contact between the physical and the spiritual. But when used with faith, it can become a powerful channel for the manifestation of divine presence. For years, I used anointing oil as part of my deliverance ministry. I developed a simple technique. I would put a little oil on my hand and then greet the person who was supposedly possessed. If there was truly a demonic presence, it often manifested at that moment. It was as if the oil, or rather what it symbolized, forced the entity to reveal itself. But it didn't always work that way. Sometimes evil is more cunning, more patient. Sometimes it waits, it hides, it evaluates its opponent before showing itself. And that's exactly what happened in the case that would change my life forever. It all began with a desperate email. A couple wrote to me about their teenage daughter, about 14 or 15 years old, who was showing extremely disturbing behaviors. She spoke in voices that weren't hers, new information she couldn't have obtained through natural means, and occasionally displayed physical strength that didn't match her thin frame. At first, I hesitated to accept the case. Over the years, I had received many similar requests that turned out to be false alarms. Teenagers pretending to be possessed to get attention. Cases of misdiagnosed psychological disorders. Even elaborate setups to mock me or the ministry. So I did what I always do before accepting a case. I prayed. I asked God for discernment, clarity, confirmation of whether I should get involved or not. And the answer I felt in my spirit was clear. Go. This one is real. They need you. When God speaks that clearly, I can't refuse. But I knew I couldn't face something like this alone. Experience had taught me that in serious cases of demonic possession, a team of intercessors is necessary. People of solid faith who can maintain a prayer shield while deliverance is performed. I contacted 4 intercessors I had worked with. In the past, people I fully trusted, but for different reasons. None could accompany me. I called another group of 4, and the same thing happened. I was already starting to feel there was spiritual resistance, as if something or someone was actively preventing me from forming the right team. Finally, 4 people volunteered to accompany me. I didn't know them as well as my usual intercessors, and to be frank, I had reservations. Their spiritual lives didn't seem to be at their best. Some were dealing with their own problems, their own battles. Any expert in deliverance will tell you that spiritual tools must be clean. It's like a doctor who wouldn't use a contaminated scalpel for surgery. An intercessor with unresolved spiritual problems can become an entry point for the enemy, a crack in the team's armor. I expressed my concerns, but they insisted God could use them despite their weaknesses. And after praying about it, I felt I should allow them to come. Perhaps, I thought, this would be a learning experience for them, a way to show them the seriousness of what we faced. In retrospect, I wonder if this decision was really guided by God, or if it was my own impatience, my own arrogance. Perhaps I should have waited until I had the right team. But the past can't be changed, only learned from. We arrived at the family's house on a Friday afternoon. It was a normal house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing to suggest what was happening inside. The parents received us with evident relief and gratitude. Their daughter, whom I'll call Emma, to protect her identity, was sitting on the sofa, watching television like any normal teenager. Seeing her, a doubt crossed my mind. She looked so ordinary, so normal. Nothing in her appearance or behavior suggested she was under the influence of evil forces. But I've learned over the years that appearances can be deceiving, especially in these cases. I approached Emma and, as usual, discreetly applied anointing oil to my hand before greeting her. This small gesture typically provoked an immediate reaction if a demonic entity was present. But not this time. Emma shook my hand without problems, smiled politely, and even joked about how her parents were exaggerating the whole situation. This increased my doubts. Was there really something here? Or was it just the worried imagination of parents? I decided the best thing was to spend time with the family, observe, evaluate the situation before taking any action. So we stayed. We had dinner together, talked about everyday topics, learned more about the family and their history. Everything seemed normal, perhaps too normal. My improvised intercessors seemed increasingly uncomfortable, as if wondering why they had come in the first place. When night came, around 7, we were already preparing to leave. I hadn't seen anything suggesting demonic possession, and although the parents insisted something was wrong, I was beginning to think perhaps this was a case where they needed help of another kind, maybe family counseling or psychological support for their teenage daughter. We were saying goodbye when everything changed. Emma, who had been perfectly normal all afternoon, suddenly began to contort. Not in a normal way, not like someone having a seizure or convulsion. It was something completely unnatural, as if her bones and joints were being manipulated by an invisible force. Her body arched backward in a way that defied physics, her limbs twisted at impossible angles. And her face, her face changed completely. It was no longer the face of a teenager. It was something ancient, something malevolent, something that shouldn't exist in this world. And then she spoke, but not with her voice. The voice that came from her throat was deep, harsh, multiple, as if several entities were speaking in unison. I'm going to kill you all. No one will leave here alive tonight. Fear is a powerful emotion. It paralyzes you, clouds your judgment, makes you forget everything you know. And at that moment, I felt fear. A primitive, visceral fear, the kind that makes you want to run and not look back. My first instinct was to get out of there, to grab my phone, call my wife, tell her something had gone terribly wrong. But I knew I couldn't run away, not just out of pride or for my reputation, but because this family needed me. This young girl needed me. And just as I was trying to gather my courage and faith, the lights went out. It wasn't just a blown fuse. It was as if darkness itself had invaded the house, swallowing all light. An absolute, impenetrable darkness. It's time to intercede, I told my companions, hoping they would begin to pray aloud, to cry out to God for protection and deliverance. But all I received was silence, a frightening silence that was only interrupted by the desperate cries of the parents and the demonic voice that continued threatening us from the darkness. In my years of ministry, I had learned that facing a demonic entity with open eyes was essential. Never close your eyes, never lower your guard. But in that total darkness, it didn't matter if my eyes were open or closed. I couldn't see anything. I was completely vulnerable. Out of pure survival instinct, I leaned against a wall. At least that way I knew nothing could attack me from behind. But that false security quickly vanished when I began to hear objects flying around the room, hitting walls, floor, and furniture. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could hear it, feel it. Chaos reigned in that house. It was at that moment, cornered in darkness, surrounded by supernatural manifestations, when I had to make a crucial decision: succumb to fear or cling to my faith. And I chose faith. I began to pray aloud, to proclaim God's word, not a silent prayer, but words verbalized, declared with authority despite the trembling in my voice. Though 1,000 fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, it will not come near you. Because you have made the Lord your refuge, the Most High your dwelling place. There's a power in the spoken word that doesn't exist in silent thought. When we verbalize our faith, when we declare God's promises, we are literally using the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Demonic entities can't read our thoughts, but they can hear our words, and they tremble at the name of Jesus. I don't know how long I was like that, reciting scriptures, proclaiming the name of Jesus, clinging to every divine promise I could remember. It could have been minutes or hours. Time loses its meaning in moments like that. But suddenly, someone managed to turn on a flashlight. The small beam of light seemed incredibly bright after so much darkness, and what it illuminated surprised me. Emma was on the floor, apparently normal, crying. There were no signs of the entity that had spoken through her moments before. Cautiously, I approached her. Experience had taught me to be careful. Sometimes, entities pretend to have gone only to attack again when you lower your guard. But Emma seemed genuinely liberated. Her eyes had returned to normal. Her body was no longer contorted in impossible positions. Crying, she told us she had been playing with a Ouija board weeks before, out of curiosity for fun. I didn't believe it was real, she told us through tears. It was just a stupid game with my friends. But it wasn't a game. It never is. These spiritual doors that people open so casually can have devastating consequences. It's like playing with fire when you're soaked in gasoline. Only the ignorant don't fear the flames. We prayed for Emma, renounced any legal right the entities might claim over her due to that game, and spiritually cleansed the house. By the time we finished, it was very late, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The house felt light, clean, as if a dark cloud had dissipated. The parents thanked us profusely, and Emma promised never to experiment with the occult again. It was a happy ending, or so it seemed. But as I drove home that night, something bothered me, a feeling of unease, as if there was something I had overlooked, something important I wasn't seeing. In the days that followed, that unease only grew. I felt strangely distant, disconnected from both God and the people around me. Prayers that normally flowed easily felt forced, mechanical. The joy that had characterized my ministry for years seemed to have vanished. And then, the nightmares began. Vivid, terrible dreams, where I saw myself trapped in that dark house again and again. But in these versions of the dream, I never managed to escape. The entity found me in the darkness, dragged me into the depths, to a place where God's light couldn't reach me. I would wake up screaming, soaked in cold sweat, with a fear so great it paralyzed me. Sarah, my wife, was increasingly worried. Something happened that night, she would tell me. Something you're not telling me. And she was right. There was something I hadn't told her, that I hadn't dared admit even to myself. In that total darkness, in that moment of absolute terror, I had doubted. Not just my abilities or the wisdom of being there, but God Himself. For a brief moment, I had believed He had abandoned me, that He had sent me into a battle for which I wasn't prepared, and then left me alone. That doubt, that moment of lack of faith, had opened a small crack in my spiritual armor. And something had entered through that crack, something subtle that was now growing inside me like a seed of darkness. I hadn't realized it then, but that night, as the demon left Emma, a part of it, or perhaps something completely different, had found a new home. In me. Weeks passed before I was willing to accept what was happening. Weeks of spiritual deterioration, of distancing from God, of increasingly dark thoughts that didn't seem mine but arose from my own mind. Thoughts of despair, of abandonment, of uselessness. Thoughts that whispered to me that all my ministry had been in vain, that light would never overcome darkness, that it was time to surrender. Sarah was the first to see it clearly. One night, after another particularly violent nightmare, she took my hands and looked straight into my eyes. "This isn't you," she said with a certainty that admitted no doubts. "Something entered you that night, but you don't have to face it alone. I'm here, and more importantly, God is here. He hasn't abandoned you. He never has." Her words penetrated the fog that had enveloped my mind for weeks. And with sudden clarity, I saw what had been happening. I saw the enemy's strategy. Use my moment of weakness to plant a seed of doubt that would grow until it consumed me completely. But now that I could see it, I could fight it. I've seen addicts break the chains that had bound them for decades. I've seen broken families rebuild, shattered relationships renewed, hardened hearts softened under God's loving touch. And I've learned that these manifestations of divine grace, these transformations of the human heart, are the true miracles. They are more powerful, more meaningful, more eternal than any supernatural phenomenon I could witness. Because in the end, it's not about dramatic exorcisms or spectacular manifestations. It's about souls being liberated, hearts being healed, lives being transformed. It's about God's kingdom advancing, one heart at a time, one life at a time. Sarah, my beloved wife, used to tell me this when she saw me too focused on external manifestations. John, remember that our God is not in the earthquake, nor in the fire, nor in the strong wind. He's in the still, small voice that speaks to the heart. She was always wiser than me. Her absence remains a constant ache in my life. But with each passing day, that pain gradually transforms into gratitude for the time we had together, for all she taught me, for how she held me up in my darkest moments. And I know, with the certainty that only comes from deep faith, that someday we will meet again. That I'll see her face, hear her laugh, feel her embrace. Not in a dream or a vision, but in the most real reality that exists. Eternity with our Creator. Meanwhile, I move forward, sharing my story, helping others find their way from darkness to light, being a living testimony that there is no darkness so deep that light cannot penetrate. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from everything I've shared, it's this: the demon doesn't want to leave. It never does. It holds on with all its might, uses every trick, every deception, every weakness it can find. It will fight to the end to maintain its control. But there is someone stronger. Someone whose light the darkness cannot comprehend or overcome. Someone who already won the decisive battle 2,000 years ago on a cross outside Jerusalem. And that someone is on our side. That someone loves us with a love that transcends human understanding. That someone seeks us out even when we're in the depths of darkness. Even when we ourselves have consciously moved away from his light. That someone found me, a lost young man who had given his life to the forces of darkness. He found me, rescued me, transformed me. And if he could do it for me, he can do it for anyone, no matter what you've done, no matter what pacts you've made, no matter how deeply you're immersed in darkness. His light can reach you, his love can restore you, his truth can set you free. This is my testimony. This is my story. From darkness to light, from slavery to freedom, from death to life. And it can be your story too. Because exorcism, true exorcism, isn't about casting out demons with elaborate rituals or memorized phrases. It's about allowing God's light to expel the darkness from every corner of our being. It's about surrendering completely to Him, allowing Him to transform us from the inside out. And although the demon doesn't want to leave, although it resists with all its might, it doesn't have the last word. The last word belongs to the one who is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. The one who makes all things new, even lives as shattered as mine once was. This is the truth that sustains me. This is the hope that drives me. This is the light that guides my path. And this light will shine forever, illuminating the way for all those who, like I once was, are searching for their way home in the midst of darkness. Because in the end, when all is said and done, light always, always prevails. An epilogue for you. Almost 3 years have passed since I lost Sarah. Time has softened some of the pain, but I miss her every day. However, her legacy lives on in the lives we touched together, in the ministry we built, in the love we shared with so many lost and broken people. I live more quietly now. I don't travel as much as before to give my testimony. I've focused on mentoring young ministers, sharing what I've learned so they can avoid some of the mistakes I made. Sometimes, in the quiet nights when I'm alone with my thoughts, I remember my journey. From that rebellious young man with a heart full of anger, through the dedicated Satanist, to the man I am today. And I marvel at the patience and love of God, who never abandoned me, even when I had abandoned him. If I've learned anything in all these years, it's that the spiritual world is more real and closer than most people imagine. That the battle between light and darkness is not an abstract concept or a metaphor, but a reality that unfolds every day around us and within us. But I've also learned that in this battle, we're not alone. We're never alone. The creator of the universe, the one who formed the stars and planets, the one who designed every detail of our being, is with us, fighting for us, waiting for us. And that truth makes everything else seem small in comparison. So if you're in the midst of your own battle, if you feel that darkness surrounds you, if you think there's no hope, let me tell you what I myself had to learn the hard way. Light always prevails. Always. You just have to take one step toward it, just one, and he will travel the rest of the way to meet you. That's my story. That's my testimony. And I hope, from the depths of my heart, that you too find your way to the light. Because there is light. Oh yes, there is. And it's more beautiful than you could ever imagine.